Good evening, Facebook, and YouTube, and people, if you're watching this, having seen me link it on Facebook or on Twitter, we're on Gordy Canuck, or on Reddit, we're on Grow a Set. It is Wednesday evening, December 28th, 11:51. And in all likelihood, this is going to be my last video of the calendar year 2022. The only way I could see myself doing a video before the year rolls into 2023 is if something incredibly significant happens, something like when the Georgia Guidestones were blown up and then demolished. I think that happened sometime in August or September. And I'm assuming that anyone watching a video that I'm putting out is well aware of America's former Stonehenge monument in Elberton, Georgia, with their guidelines for a new enlightened age with a depopulated planet and all the rest. I wanted to do a video tonight talking about a paradox, a dichotomy exists when comparing 2020 with 2022. I put a post up on my Facebook wall, just a short little meme-like post. And in my limited sphere, it went about as viral as anything I've ever written. I put it out on December 26th at 2:21 a.m. and it's already been shared 253 times. That, in the grand scheme of things, when things truly go viral, they're shared thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of times. I have 3,600 friends and followers on Facebook, which is, it's not minuscule, but, it's certainly not like a Jordan Peterson or a Ben Shapiro or, Joe Rogan or anything like that, or Dr. Peter McCulloch. Footprint is larger than some, but the giants out there, I'm a pipsqueak. But with that being said, here's what I wrote, and it seems to have struck a nerve with a lot of people, given that it's been shared 253 times. It's been shared more than it's been reacted to. It's had almost 200 reactions, but shared 253 times. And I think that's because people have shared it, and then it has been shared from those accounts, not from my own. Anyway, here's what I wrote. 2020, an 85-year-old dies in long-term care. We have to stop this. 2022, a 16-year-old dies in her sleep. Oh, well, these things happen. And that's largely the reaction that I see contrasting 2020 with 2022. In 2020, March, April, May, the reporting was in Canada, and certainly in Ontario, Canada, where I live. Ground zero for COVID was in a little tiny town up in northern Ontario called Bobcaygeon, famous as a cottage destination and for being the title of a tragically hip song. But in March, April, May of 2020, Bobcaygeon became famous for the Pinecrest Nursing Home, because COVID was tearing every night about the tsunami of death ripping through this Pinecrest Nursing Home. Point, there was an article saying a third of the residents had died due to COVID. And when you talk about nursing homes, hospices, long-term care facilities, it's the last move a person typically makes before going to the morgue. If someone moves out of a long-term care, nursing home, hospice, it's to move into another long-term care, nursing home or hospice or palliative setting. Sadly, these are the places where people go when they are at the end of their lives. I've shared many times, the Ontario Long-Term Care Association published a snapshot of their patient population or their resident population from the year 2019. And 86% of the residents in Ontario's long-term care facilities couldn't bathe, feed, toilet, dress themselves without extensive help. That's their work on their own website. Extensive help. roughly 75, 3/4 of the residents suffer from cardiovascular and circulatory diseases. And it's an incredibly sick and frail population. And hearing that 1/3 of the residents had died with the cause being listed as COVID, okay. If it wasn't COVID, would it have been something else? Would it have been the flu? Would it have been RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, or however you pronounce that word, or streptococcus, or a gastrointestinal bug, or whatever. And so one thing the news outlets never gave us any context. They never gave us any benchmarks. How at this Pinecrest nursing home, how many people died in a typical month? What was the average? When COVID hit, were the deaths that they were experiencing, were they higher than normal, lower than normal, about the same? They never told us. And yet, because of the laser-like coverage on all these deaths, notwithstanding that it was older people, typically at the end of natural life expectancy, this is what caused people to buy into, we got to do everything we can. We've got to shut down. And remember what we did. Isolate, shelter in place, I think was the term. Stay inside, stay safe. So the abused children and spouses were told to shelter in place with their abusers. Meanwhile, all while liquor stores, the LCBO in Ontario was declared essential. You could go to the liquor store, get your booze, that's essential. The tobacco industry, that's essential. The manufacture, sale, distribution of tobacco products, you're good to go. But if you run a fitness studio, that's closed. People who needed support for things like mental health issues, well, we'll do that by Zoom or by a phone call now. No more person to person, too dangerous. Cancer screening, essential. The most important tool in the box for surviving a cancer diagnosis is early detection. Cancer patients are routinely told that early detection is the most vital aspect of surviving a cancer diagnosis, because if we catch it early, we can treat it. If it spreads too far, well, there's nothing we can do. And yet cancer screenings were canceled. Life-saving heart surgeries were canceled. There was a gentleman in Calgary, you can look it up, a Calgary musician in his 40s with 2 young daughters and a wife. Left behind a widow, and two girls lost their father because no hospital would perform the surgery this man needed to live. But if it was a woman needing an abortion, well, that's okay. We can risk viral spread for an abortion, but not for a life-saving heart surgery. And people bought into this. They were okay with this. Up in Peterborough, Ontario, there was a gentleman, I'm going to say his name, it was in the paper. His name is Alex Masters, and he owned a hair cutting place up in Peterborough, and the bills don't stop. And he was opening up his haircutting place to he was open for business. And when I read about that, I called him up and I booked an appointment for my youngest son. Great, get him a haircut. I'd already given him one and it made him look horrible. So I figured Alex could fix what I had ruined. Unlike me, my littlest guy has a great set of hair. And God love Alex Masters. On the day I was to go for the appointment, he called me up, and he unfortunately was having to close down his shop because they were threatening to call Children's Aid on him. Father himself of a young girl. And that was the degree to which people were going. I actually was up in Peterborough. I was attending a church there that was remaining open, Hills City Baptist. And I went to the service, and then afterward, I wanted to see this guy's shop. I just felt compelled to go and take a look at it. And I was standing out on the porch area in front of his shop and reading the notices on the board about the health notices and what have you. And a woman came up wearing a mask, big shock. And she said, "Oh, pardon me, I just need to check the door. I want to make sure it's locked." And she attempted the door and it opened, strangely enough. And I said, "Are you with Public Health?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Are you okay with this?" And very self-righteously, I've heard it referred to as liberal arts confidence, she said, "Oh, if it's for public health, oh yes, absolutely." You know, the contradictions that people put up with were absolutely mind-blowing. Amazon warehouses in their what they call their fulfillment centers in the Toronto airport area had, according to reporting by the National Post, over 500 confirmed cases of COVID, but they were left open. Well, no one wanted their Amazon to be shut down, but hammer a gentleman just simply trying to run a business and pay his bills. And they were, "Oh, good, shut him down." Oh, it was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And why was that? And now contrast that now to 2020. Just a report out today of a 16-year-old kid in Minnesota, a hockey player, died suddenly. And you're reading about these reports every day. An ABC producer of one of their shows or director of one of their shows, 37 years of age, young, fit, healthy guy, dies suddenly. You know, basketball players, football players, Olympic athletes, soccer players. Every day we're reading about a young, healthy person. Often it's tragically dying, or sometimes, like, Tori Spelling was just in the news because she couldn't breathe all of a sudden. Another big fan of and the inference is obvious as to why all of a sudden all these have exploded. Back earlier, 2 basketball players died on the same day of basically what they call sudden adult death syndrome, or sudden arrhythmia death syndrome. And this is happening every single day. But the reaction now is, well, ho hum, these things happen. No, because the the underlying reason as to why is obvious. What's different now? What's different in 2021 and 2022 versus 2020? What changed? There's only one thing that's changed. And so I'm going to suggest a couple of reasons. Firstly, the reason everyone supported the insane, contradictory, counterproductive lockdown measures and other mandates was because that's the way people were programmed to think and how they were programmed to feel. The nightly news would come on with ominous sounding music, music in the background, very somber, serious, heavy music. And then in very somber tones, the news anchor would read off his teleprompter, words to the effect of, the surge in COVID deaths continues in Bobcaygeon, Ontario, as more residents at Pinecrest Nursing Home succumb to the deadly coronavirus. Health officials are urging everyone to do everything possible to keep themselves safe. Isolate in place, stay in your home, do not go out unless absolutely necessary. Just creating this impression of, this invisible deadly killer that's going to get everybody. And it was propaganda on steroids. And you would think that after all the lies that we've endured over the last 40, 50 years, the Vietnam War, we got to stop the dominoes from falling, and people went for it. People bought it. Americans were all in, rah, let's go to Vietnam. And, 1, 2, 3, 4, what are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. My next stop is Vietnam. Be the first parents on your block to have your boy come home in a box. All rah, because we had to stop the dominoes from falling. That was the propaganda of that era. Then the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, when George H.W. Bush was president, and they hired a PR agency that came up with a story about Iraq soldiers throwing babies out of incubators. Oh, that'll work on the dumb population. They'll believe that. They'll believe anything. They believe the dominoes. They'll believe them if we tell them that Iraqi soldiers are throwing babies out of incubators. And they did, and people believed it. And then the second Gulf War with George H.W. Bush's son, George W. Bush, as president, the weapons of mass destruction. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein is a threat to world peace and security. We have to take him out. And if anyone dared to suggest, wait, come on, Iraq doesn't have weapons of mass destruction. Give me a break. Oh, you know better, eh? You're an intelligence expert, I guess, eh? Colin Powell, I saw him on the nightly news. He proved it at the UN, but you know better. You get gaslit. And now, same thing, rinse and repeat. That's how they got everyone to buy in to the fact that people who are old, sick, frail, and at the end of natural life expectancy and dying, all of a sudden they got us to take something which is normal, which has always happened, and to think of it as being unusual. Oh my gosh. When's the last time a bunch of 80-plus-year-old people at the end of natural life receiving end-of-life care in a hospice started dying? Well, how about every day of the year going back forever? It happened. But no, the news says I'm supposed to worry about it. Like the news told me I had to worry about the weapons of destruction. Like the news told me I had to worry about the Iraqi soldiers throwing babies out of incubators. Like the news told me I had to worry about the falling dominoes in Southeast Asia, turning the entire world communist. We are so easily manipulated. And now Why isn't anyone? Now we do have something genuinely happening that is genuinely out of the ordinary. You do not have stories about 16-year-old hockey players having a heart attack, 1 in 10 years. There's got to be at least a dozen that have happened in the past year. 1 every 10. Basketball players, football players, soccer players, kids dying in their sleep. And, oh, well, these things happen. And why are people accepting that? Because the news told them to. Oh, well, it's not because of no. These things happen. The sudden emergence of an autoimmune disorder caused his death. His heart just stopped beating. We don't know why, but it wasn't because of no. Don't worry. Go get your booster. They're never going to link any of this. Ever. Did the United States ever admit that they lied about the weapons of mass destruction? No. Did the U.S. ever issue a formal apology for making up that story about the Iraqi soldiers tossing babies out of incubators? No. Did the Americans ever admit that the falling domino theory was just a crock and that the real purpose behind the Vietnam War was geopolitical and to clean out the ghettos? Because the U.S. back in 1975 and prior, during the Vietnam War era, they had the draft. And one way to get out of the draft was to be enrolled in post-secondary education. So who was going over to fight in the war? The poor and the poorly educated were 50,000 American young men killed. And, buy into it. And sadly, there's the expression I like to use is that I'm farting into a hurricane. I'm tilting it, to quote Cervantes, Don Quixote, I'm tilting at windmills, and I know it. But it's what I do. Part of the reason I do it, it's cost me a lot. Refusing to, this is not medical advice. So community standards, people at YouTube, bite me. Not giving out medical advice, just telling you what, and call me an idiot if you want. Fine, go ahead. But why am I unvaxxed? It's cost me a lot being unvaxxed. The pressure put on me to get vaxxed was enormous. I had a sergeant in the military who kept saying to me, when are you getting and this is before they were mandated. So when are you getting the shot? I said, I'm not. He said, oh, come on, you're going to have to get it eventually. And I knew that was true if I stayed in the military. He said, you're going to have to get it eventually. They're going to force it. I'm like, yeah, I know. That's why I put in my voluntary release. Not sticking around. I sometimes regret that decision. I regret not fighting it. I regret not having fought for an exemption. I could have put in and said that I have a religious exemption. I am a member. I'm on the rolls with the Christian Reformed Church, and apparently that's part of their creed. But I wasn't willing to put my bodily autonomy up on the auction block and to have some unknown individual just go denied. And then I would have to leave because of it. But beyond that, forget work. I mean, my family, my immediate family, they're put off, more than put off. Not just by my refusal to take the jab, but my vocal attitude. They would prefer I just go along to get along. And I can't do, in good conscience, I cannot do that. I cannot just go along to get along. We've all seen the picture, probably. There's a picture that gets shared famously, and it's obviously from I suspect it's from the Nazi era, and it shows a large swath of people, and everyone's making the Nazi salute, except one who's just standing there like this. And quite often he's circled, and it says, "Be this guy." Well, if you look at that picture, it's probably 20, 30 people in it, and only one is, there's just one guy refusing to go along. That's the way the world is. Most people go along. Most people went along in Nazi Germany. Most people went along with the Vietnam War propaganda. Most people went along with the Gulf War propaganda, first in the first Gulf War, then in the second, where people are easily manipulated, easily controlled. And we're kept busy by so much stuff. The Raptors playing, the Leafs are playing, the NFL season is going full bore. There's always distractions, and having the courage of your convictions in this era, it's probably as hard as it has ever been. I noticed I had the Hot Mess Mom. She wrote God's Waiting Room. I don't know what exactly you wrote that in reference to. I'm assuming it's to nursing homes, hospices, long-term care facilities. Sadly, and I don't mean to disparage the value of the life of the elderly. Life is precious, but not so much so anymore in Canada. Now we have medical assistance in dying, and we've had it since 2016, where an individual who's in terminal health and suffering, they can ask for medical assistance in dying, like a Dr. Kevorkian, to help them out, to ensure that they're successful and don't suffer even more. And to an extent, I think it's something that a lot of people can buy into, because what do we do with our pets? Pets are old and suffering. We don't want them suffering anymore, so we put the dog or the cat to sleep. We don't refer to it as euthanasia. We put Buster to sleep. We put Spot to sleep. And it's gut-wrenching and it hurts, but ultimately it's done for compassionate reasons. I myself have done it on 2 occasions with a pet. And yet with our lungs, often because human life is seen to be more sacred than animal life. Thanks, Hot Mess Mom. Because human life is seen as more sacred, which is something else we're getting away from now. The sanctity of human life we're watching it being programmed out of the population, this belief that human life is sacred. The sanctity of human life, it's being watered down to the point they're trying to eliminate that concept. And so they've just come out. There's an activity book on medical assistance in dying, put out for Canadians. Is it the right thing for you? It made big news recently that a Canadian veteran, a soldier, a former Canadian soldier, a veteran, a woman who's a Paralympian, she wanted a ramp. She's in a wheelchair, and she needed a ramp in her house, because going up and down the stairs, when she went to go outside, she'd have to slide down the stairs on her backside, dragging her wheelchair with her, and then reverse when coming back in, having to bum slide her way back up the stairs, dragging the wheelchair. So she wanted a wheelchair lift type or a ramp to be installed in her house. And Veterans Affairs Canada asked her if she would like medical assistance in dying. And now there's talk of they want to expand this MAID program and make it available to kids without parental consent or knowledge. You talk about evil. There's no other way to put it. It is 100% purely evil. And this is the world we're living in. And people don't want to talk about it. They won't want to talk about all these kids dying suddenly in their sleep. And part of the reason is that they've been programmed not to associate it with and to view it as being just something that's normal and natural, something that it happens. And there's another reason, though, because I think deep down, somewhere in the inner reaches of a person's soul, they know deep down that this is not normal. That this doesn't happen, not to the degree that it's happening now. Like I say, you want to hear about a young kid, 13, 14, 15 years of age, a young, healthy, athletic, hockey player dying suddenly for no reason. Once every 10 years. How many have there been just in the past few months? And no, it's it's happening a lot more now than it ever has. And that's got to be unsettling for anyone who put their faith and trust in government health officials, in their own family doctor. But if a family doctor wrote you an exemption and said you don't have to get it, or if your family doctor went public and said they had concerns, then they would lose their license to practice medicine in all likelihood. And many Canadian doctors have lost their licenses for having the courage to speak out. I've mentioned previously Dr. Francis Christian, a teaching surgeon at the University of Saskatchewan, and smart gentleman, because when the dean at the University of Saskatchewan, as well as I think Saskatchewan's chief medical officer of health and another individual, there were 3 individuals on this call with Dr. Francis Christian, informing him that his privileges at the university hospital where he worked, that his privileges were being suspended, that he was under review and all manner. They were blowing up this man's life. And Dr. Christian had the brains, the smarts. He recorded the call. If you go to the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, they may still have the page up. I don't know if they still do, but I listened to the call and it was disgusting. One of the individuals speaking to Dr. Christian tried to gaslight him. There's no other term for it. She said, "Oh my God, Francis, you're sounding very agitated. I'm concerned. That you," and he was calm, rational, fine. And she was trying to gaslight him, and it almost, you can go down some scary rabbit holes, but if anything had happened to him, we were talking to him on the phone and he sounded quite irrational and very unstable. They could have framed it, but he recorded the call, and anyone with a functioning set of ears and a functioning brain could realize Dr. Francis Christian was the most sane person on that call. He was simply trying to understand why the University of Saskatchewan and why the dean of his school and why the chief medical officer of health was ignoring every scientific principle that has existed for over 100 years. Science has not evoked this idea of consensus. It's like, okay, we're going to have everyone come into a room and vote. Who cares? Still doesn't mean you're right. The consensus about the jabs was in late 2020, early 2021, was that they were the ticket out. Alberta Health Services public service campaign on buses saying, this is our ticket back to normal, with a picture of a hypodermic needle. Our ticket back to normal. The virus stops with each jab person, that it cannot infect you, which means it can't go from you and infect another person. This is our ticket out. The virus will stop. That was the consensus view that was put out, and it was wrong. Consensus doesn't mean right. Consensus in Austria in 1937, 1938, 98% of Austrians voted approving the annexation of their country to Nazi Germany. 98%. There's consensus for you. 98% of Austrians said, yeah, let the Nazis come in and take us over. So that was the right decision because it was the popular decision. I wish there was some way to wake people up. I wish there was some way. I don't like the term wake people up. That's this whole idea of wokeism, of being woke, can take on different connotations. The expression I prefer to use is for people to open their eyes. I don't know. I'm constantly trying to think of some way to get people to open their eyes to the simple reality. But I think for many, one, they're programmed by the nightly news, which will never mention a person's jab status. Others, Justin Bieber, facial paralysis, his wife has some serious health issue, all of a sudden pops up out of nowhere, but they'll never mention their jab status. Tori Spelling, they'll never mention her jab status. This 16-year-old kid who just died in Minnesota, they'll never mention it. All these players in the NFL, they'll never mention it. That young girl who plays for basketball at the University of Tennessee who died suddenly, never mention. Don't look, don't find. They'll rely on that falsehood that people believe that if there is an absence of evidence, that is evidence of absence. It's a bit of a convoluted phrase, but it's well known in scientific circles. Just because there isn't evidence doesn't mean the evidence isn't there. It might very well mean that you're simply not looking for it. So again, my last video for 2022, Hot Mess Mom, thank you for watching and for chiming in. And if anyone wants to leave a comment below watching this later, I do read them. If you want to like and subscribe, I see I have 4 likes already. Thank you. I do get the endorphins or whatever little chemical in the brain. And so if you want to like and subscribe and share, you can do all those things. And barring something spectacular, something significant happening, I'll probably talk to you again in 2023. I work in a retail environment now, and I notice the level of fear has increased. I'd now put the mask wearing behavior at up around 30%. It's probably 1 in 3 people, somewhere around there. 1 in 3 people are now wearing a mask, and a good number of them look absolutely terrified. And the best I can do is just be as happy and friendly as I can, whether they're masked or not. I engage, I talk, try and inject a little normalcy. I'm just reacting. I'm reading what the Hot Mess Mom wrote. She wrote, they will if the person is unvaxxed. And I didn't read I need to read it because you're reacting to something I said, and I don't know what it is I said that would generate that reaction. They will if the person is unvaxxed. If you're still watching, help me out. Oh, I think I know what she's referring to. If an unvaxxed person dies, you can be darn sure that they will put that front and center. They'll blame the death on COVID and blow up the fact. I still remember reading about a guy in Saskatchewan, a pastor in Saskatchewan, an elderly gentleman who died. They blamed COVID, and they reported this elderly pastor as saying, "I should have gotten the vaccine, shouldn't I?" And gave you no context, wouldn't tell you what his health condition was prior. No detail, no context, no benchmarks, nothing to go on. Just trust us. Well, don't trust the news. God bless everyone. See you in 2023. Hopefully, nothing significant happens in the next few days. And we'll talk to you again. Bye now.